The morning sun cast long shadows across the Naval Academy courtyard as Captain Elena Vasquez walked with purpose toward the main building. Her black boots clicked against the stone pathway, each step echoing her determination. At 28, she had already earned respect among her peers through countless hours of training and an unwavering commitment to justice. Today, however, would test everything she believed in. Elena had grown up in a small coastal town where her father worked as a fisherman. She remembered the stories he told about brave naval officers who protected their shores from pirates and foreign invaders. Those tales sparked her dream of joining the Navy, though no one in her family had ever imagined a woman could rise to such heights. Her journey from a fisherman's daughter to a decorated captain had been filled with obstacles, prejudice, and moments when she almost gave up. But her strong will and natural leadership abilities had carried her through every challenge. The academy, where she now served as an instructor, buzzed with activity. Young cadets hurried past her, their uniforms crisp and their faces bright with ambition. Elena smiled, remembering her own days as an eager student. She had been one of only 3 women in her class, and the pressure to prove herself had been overwhelming. The male instructors had been particularly harsh, expecting her to fail at every turn. Instead, she had graduated at the top of her class and quickly earned promotions through her exceptional performance in real combat situations. As she entered the main hall, Elena noticed an unusual commotion near the administrative offices. Several senior officers stood in hushed conversation, their expressions grave. She recognized Commander Martinez, a fair man who had always treated her with respect, and Lieutenant Colonel Thompson, who had been her mentor during her early years. Their worried faces told her something serious was happening. "Captain Vasquez," Commander Martinez called out as he spotted her. "We need to speak with you immediately." Elena approached the group, her mind racing through possible reasons for their concern. Had there been an incident with one of her students? Was there news from the front lines where some of her former classmates were stationed? The weight in Martinez's voice suggested this was no routine matter. "What's wrong, sir?" she asked, maintaining her professional composure despite the growing anxiety in her chest. Lieutenant Colonel Thompson stepped forward, his weathered face showing years of difficult decisions. "Elena, we've received word that Admiral Harrison will be conducting a surprise inspection of the Academy today. He's already on his way and should arrive within the hour." The mention of Admiral Harrison's name sent a chill through Elena's body. She knew his reputation well, a man who believed women had no place in the military beyond nursing duties. He had been vocal in his opposition to female officers advancing through the ranks, and his influence within the naval hierarchy was considerable. Several promising female officers had seen their careers destroyed after encounters with him. "I see," Elena replied carefully. "What are your concerns about his visit?" Commander Martinez exchanged glances with Thompson before responding. "Elena, you know how the Admiral feels about women in command positions. Your success here has been remarkable, but it's also made you a target. We've heard rumors that he's specifically coming to find reasons to remove you from your position." Elena felt her jaw tighten, but she forced herself to remain calm. She had faced discrimination before, but never from someone with Admiral Harrison's power and influence. The thought of losing everything she had worked for because of his prejudice filled her with anger, but she knew that showing emotion would only give him ammunition to use against her. "What do you suggest I do?" she asked, though part of her already knew the answer would be unsatisfactory. "Keep a low profile during his visit," Thompson advised. "Don't give him any reason to single you out. Perhaps you could take sick leave for the day or handle administrative duties away from the main areas he'll be inspecting." The suggestion hit Elena like a physical blow. After years of fighting to be treated as an equal, the idea of hiding from a superior officer went against everything she believed in. She had never backed down from a challenge, and the thought of doing so now made her feel sick. But she also understood the practical reality. Admiral Harrison could end her career with a single report. "I appreciate your concern," Elena said slowly, "but I won't hide from him. I've done nothing wrong, and my record speaks for itself. If Admiral Harrison wants to remove me, he'll have to find legitimate reasons, not manufactured ones. Her colleagues looked uncomfortable with her decision, but Elena could see respect in their eyes. They knew her well enough to understand that asking her to hide was like asking her to betray her own principles. She had built her career on facing challenges head-on, and she wasn't about to change that approach now. As the group dispersed, Elena made her way to her office to prepare for the inspection. Her small workspace was meticulously organized, with commendations and certificates covering one wall and tactical manuals neatly arranged on her desk. She had always maintained the highest standards, knowing that any mistake would be magnified because of her gender. Elena spent the next 30 minutes reviewing her recent performance reports and ensuring all her documentation was in perfect order. Her students had consistently shown improvement under her guidance, and several had gone on to distinguished careers in the fleet. The tactical innovations she had developed had been adopted by other academies, and her leadership seminars were always overbooked. By any objective measure, she was an exemplary officer. The sound of vehicles arriving outside drew her attention to the window. A convoy of black cars had pulled up to the main entrance, and she could see uniformed figures emerging from them. In the center of the group stood Admiral Harrison himself, a tall, imposing man with silver hair and cold eyes that seemed to judge everything they looked upon. Elena had seen him before at formal ceremonies, but this would be their first direct interaction. She watched as he surveyed the academy grounds with obvious displeasure, pointing out perceived deficiencies to his aide and making notes in a small book. Even from a distance, his body language radiated disapproval and authority. Taking a deep breath, Elena straightened her uniform one final time and prepared to face whatever the day would bring. She had worked too hard and sacrificed too much to let one man's prejudice destroy her career. Whatever Admiral Harrison had planned, she would meet it with dignity and professionalism. The inspection began in the main training areas, where Elena's students were conducting their morning exercises. She stood at attention with the other instructors as Admiral Harrison moved through their ranks, asking pointed questions and examining every detail with obvious skepticism. His aide followed closely behind, taking notes on everything the Admiral observed. "Who is responsible for training these cadets?" Admiral Harrison asked, his voice carrying clearly across the courtyard. "Captain Vasquez has primary responsibility for this group, sir," Commander Martinez replied, gesturing toward Elena. The Admiral's gaze fixed on Elena with obvious distaste. She could feel his assessment as he looked her up and down, clearly finding her presence objectionable. The moment stretched uncomfortably as other officers shifted nervously around them. "Captain," Admiral Harrison said finally, his tone dripping with disdain. "I've heard interesting reports about your methods here." "Yes, sir," Elena replied crisply, maintaining perfect military bearing despite the obvious hostility in his voice. "Tell me, Captain, do you believe that coddling these future officers serves the Navy's interests?" The question was clearly a trap, designed to make her look either weak or insubordinate. Elena chose her words carefully. "Sir, I believe in preparing cadets for the realities of naval service through rigorous training that builds both skill and character. Every method I employ has been proven effective in developing competent officers." Admiral Harrison's expression darkened at her confident response. He clearly expected her to be intimidated into giving weak or apologetic answers. Instead, Elena had responded with the same professionalism she would show any superior officer, regardless of their obvious bias against her. "We shall see about that," he muttered, making another note in his book. The inspection continued throughout the morning, with Admiral Harrison finding fault with numerous aspects of Academy operations. Elena noticed that his criticisms focused heavily on areas where she had influence, while ignoring obvious problems in sections run by male officers. The pattern was so clear that even his own aide seemed uncomfortable with the obvious bias. During the tactical simulation review, Admiral Harrison questioned every decision Elena had made in designing the training scenarios. When she provided detailed explanations backed by statistical evidence of improved cadet performance, he dismissed her data as theoretical nonsense and suggested that real combat experience was the only valid teacher. Perhaps, Admiral, Elena said carefully, but these simulations are based on actual battle conditions documented in recent conflicts. The scenarios help cadets understand decision-making processes they'll face in the field. Are you suggesting, Captain, that your classroom theories are superior to the wisdom gained through actual naval combat? His voice rose slightly, drawing attention from nearby cadets and instructors. Elena felt the trap closing around her. Any answer she gave could be twisted to support his predetermined conclusion that she was unfit for command. She could either appear arrogant by defending her methods or incompetent by backing down from her professional judgment. Not at all, sir, she replied steadily. I'm simply explaining the educational foundation that supports practical training. These cadets will gain real experience in the fleet, but the principles they learn here help them make better decisions when they face actual combat situations. Admiral Harrison's face flushed red with obvious anger at her measured response. He had clearly expected her to either crumble under pressure or lose her temper, giving him grounds for disciplinary action. Instead, Elena maintained her professionalism while standing firm in her convictions. The tension in the courtyard was palpable as other officers watched the exchange unfold. Everyone present understood that this was about more than training methods or academy procedures. This was a test of whether merit and competence would triumph over prejudice and tradition. As the morning wore on, Admiral Harrison's frustration became increasingly obvious. Despite his best efforts to find fault with Elena's work, her records were impeccable and her explanations were thorough and professional. The cadets under her supervision performed excellently, and their respect for her was evident in their crisp responses and attentive behavior. The breaking point came during the weapons training demonstration. Elena was explaining proper rifle maintenance to a group of first-year cadets when Admiral Harrison interrupted with a sneering comment about women playing with toys they don't understand. The insult hung in the air like a challenge, and Elena felt every eye in the courtyard turn toward her. This was the moment she had been dreading and preparing for throughout her career. She could ignore the comment and appear weak, or she could defend herself and risk insubordination charges. Elena turned to face Admiral Harrison directly, her voice calm, but carrying clearly across the silent courtyard. Sir, with respect, my qualifications as a weapons instructor are well documented in my service record. I've completed advanced courses at 3 different military academies and have combat experience in 2 separate conflicts. These cadets are learning from someone who understands both the theory and practical application of military firearms. Admiral Harrison's face went purple with rage at her direct challenge to his authority. The moment of truth had arrived, and Elena stood ready to face whatever consequences would follow from refusing to accept his disrespectful treatment. The confrontation that would change everything was about to begin. The silence that followed Elena's words was deafening. Every person in the courtyard held their breath, waiting to see how Admiral Harrison would respond to what he clearly viewed as an unprecedented challenge to his authority. The morning sun seemed to intensify, casting sharp shadows across the assembled group as the tension reached a breaking point. Admiral Harrison stepped closer to Elena, his face contorted with fury. She could see the veins bulging in his neck and the way his hands trembled slightly with barely contained rage. In that moment, Elena realized she was witnessing a man who had never been directly challenged by someone he considered beneath him, especially not by a woman. "How dare you?" he hissed, his voice low and dangerous. "How dare you question my judgment, you insolent little girl?" Elena felt her stomach drop at his words, but she maintained her composure. Years of dealing with discrimination had taught her to control her reactions, even when facing the most blatant disrespect. She knew that showing anger or fear would only validate his prejudiced assumptions about women in the military. "Sir, I was simply providing factual information about my qualifications," Elena replied, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. "I meant no disrespect to your position or authority." But Admiral Harrison was beyond listening to reasonable explanations. In his mind, Elena's very existence as a successful female officer was an insult to everything he believed about military tradition and natural order. Her competence and confidence only made her presence more offensive to his worldview. "Factual information," he sneered, moving even closer until he was towering over her. "The only fact here is that you're an uppity woman who doesn't know her place. You think because you fooled a few soft-hearted officers into promoting you that you belong here among real military personnel." The gathered cadets and instructors watched in shock as Admiral Harrison's professional facade crumbled completely. This was no longer about academy procedures or training methods. This had become a personal attack fueled by deep-seated prejudice and wounded pride. Elena could feel the eyes of everyone present fixed on her, waiting to see how she would respond to such a direct assault on her character and achievements. She thought about all the young female cadets who looked up to her as a role model, and all the future women who might be inspired to pursue military careers if they saw her standing strong in this moment. "Admiral," she said carefully, "I understand you may have concerns about my methods, but my record speaks for itself. I've served my country with honor and distinction, and I'll continue to do so regardless of anyone's opinion about my gender." Admiral Harrison's face turned an even deeper shade of red at her refusal to be cowed by his intimidation tactics. He had expected her to apologize, to back down, to show the deference he believed was his due. Instead, she continued to stand her ground with quiet dignity. "Your record?" he laughed bitterly. "You mean the fabricated achievements handed to you by politically correct superiors who were afraid to tell the truth about your incompetence? I've seen your type before. Women who think they can play soldier because they've been coddled and protected by men too weak to maintain proper standards." Elena felt something snap inside her at his words. It wasn't just the personal insult. It was the dismissal of every sacrifice she had made, every hour of extra training she had endured, every moment she had proven herself in the face of doubt and discrimination. He was erasing not just her achievements, but the struggles of every woman who had fought for the right to serve their country. "With respect, Admiral," Elena said, her voice gaining strength, "you know nothing about my struggles or my achievements. I've earned every promotion through merit and dedication, not through favoritism or lowered standards. I've led men and women in combat, saved lives under fire, and trained officers who've gone on to serve with distinction. Your prejudice doesn't change those facts." The courtyard fell completely silent as Elena finished speaking. Everyone present understood they were witnessing something unprecedented, a direct confrontation between old prejudices and new realities, between tradition and progress, between fear and courage. Admiral Harrison stared at Elena in disbelief. In his decades of service, no subordinate had ever spoken to him with such directness, especially not someone he viewed as fundamentally unqualified to wear the uniform. His shock quickly transformed into unbridled rage as he processed what he saw as the ultimate act of insubordination. "You dare to lecture me?" he roared, his voice echoing off the academy buildings. "You pathetic excuse for an officer. You're nothing but a diversity hire who's been promoted beyond your abilities to satisfy political correctness." Elena watched as Admiral Harrison raised his hand, and for a split second, she couldn't believe what she was seeing. Years of military protocol had conditioned her to expect certain boundaries of professional behavior, even in heated disagreements. The idea that a senior officer would resort to physical violence was almost incomprehensible. Time seemed to slow as Admiral Harrison's open palm swung toward her face. Elena saw the shocked expressions on the faces around them, heard someone gasp in horror, and felt her own disbelief at what was happening. In that frozen moment, she understood that everything had changed. This was no longer about military hierarchy or professional disagreements. This had become a moment that would define not just her career, but her entire sense of self-worth and dignity. The slap connected with her cheek with a sharp crack that seemed to echo through the entire courtyard. Elena's head snapped to the side from the force of the blow, and she felt the sting of pain spread across her face. But more than the physical pain was the shock of the violation, the sudden understanding that Admiral Harrison saw her not as an officer deserving of basic respect, but as something he could physically punish for having the audacity to challenge him. For several heartbeats, Elena stood frozen in place, her hand unconsciously rising to touch her reddening cheek. Around her, she could hear sharp intakes of breath from the witnesses, the shuffle of feet as people shifted uncomfortably, and the heavy breathing of Admiral Harrison as he stood over her with obvious satisfaction. Elena's mind raced as she processed what had just happened. Every instinct told her to respond, to defend herself, to show that such treatment was unacceptable. But her military training warred with these instincts, reminding her of the severe consequences that could follow from striking a superior officer. Her career, her future, everything she had worked for hung in the balance of her next decision. Admiral Harrison seemed to mistake her momentary silence for surrender. A smug smile spread across his face as he prepared to deliver what he clearly believed would be the final blow to her defiance. "That's what happens when little girls forget their place," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Maybe now you'll learn some respect for your betters." But Elena wasn't cowering in defeat. Instead, her moment of shocked stillness had crystallized into something much more dangerous. A cold, clear understanding that some lines, once crossed, changed everything forever. The slap had not broken her spirit. It had freed her from the constraints of normal military protocol. Elena slowly turned back to face Admiral Harrison, and those who knew her well could see the change in her expression. Gone was the careful deference of military hierarchy, replaced by the steady gaze of someone who had decided that some principles were worth any sacrifice. "Admiral," she said quietly, her voice carrying a new edge that made several nearby officers take an involuntary step backward, "you've made a serious mistake." Admiral Harrison's smile faltered slightly at her tone, but his arrogance prevented him from recognizing the danger signs that others were beginning to notice. He was so accustomed to intimidating subordinates that he couldn't conceive of facing real consequences for his actions. "The only mistake here," he replied with renewed bluster, "was allowing you to serve in the first place. Consider yourself." Admiral Harrison never finished his sentence. Elena's training took over as she evaluated the threat in front of her and responded with the swift decisiveness that had earned her respect in combat situations. Her right hand shot out in a precise strike that caught the Admiral in the solar plexus, instantly doubling him over and driving the air from his lungs. As Admiral Harrison gasped and wheezed, trying to recover from the unexpected blow, Elena followed through with a perfectly executed takedown that sent him crashing to the ground. The man who had seemed so imposing and untouchable moments before now lay sprawled on the academy courtyard, his uniform disheveled and his dignity shattered. The speed of Elena's response had been so quick that Admiral Harrison's guards, who had been standing at a respectful distance during what they assumed was a routine inspection, barely had time to register what was happening before their superior was on the ground. They rushed forward with confused shouts, unsure whether to help the Admiral or restrain Elena. Elena stepped back from the fallen Admiral, her hands raised to show she posed no further threat. Her military bearing remained perfect despite what she had just done, and her voice was steady as she addressed the approaching guards. "Admiral Harrison struck me first," she announced clearly, ensuring that every witness could hear her words. "I responded to physical assault in accordance with my right to self-defense, regardless of rank or position." Admiral Harrison struggled to his hands and knees, still fighting to catch his breath after the devastating blow to his midsection. His face was now red not just from anger, but from the humiliation of being dropped so efficiently by someone he had dismissed as weak and incompetent. The guards hesitated, unsure of their next move. Their training told them to protect Admiral Harrison, but the situation was unlike anything they had experienced before. They had witnessed him strike Elena first, and her response, while shocking in its effectiveness, had been clearly defensive in nature. Commander Martinez stepped forward, his face pale, but his voice authoritative. "Everyone needs to remain calm while we sort this out," he announced. "Guards, please help the Admiral to his feet, but do not take any further action until we can review what happened here." As Admiral Harrison was helped to stand, Elena could see the rage and humiliation burning in his eyes. She knew that her career in the Navy was likely over, regardless of the circumstances that had led to this confrontation. But she also knew that she had done the right thing in defending herself against an unprovoked attack. The Academy courtyard buzzed with whispered conversations as word of the incident spread rapidly among the assembled personnel. Cadets stared in amazement at Elena, who had just done something that would become legend within the Academy walls. An instructor had not only stood up to Admiral Harrison's prejudice and abuse, but had physically defended herself when he crossed the line into assault. Elena stood straight and proud despite knowing that her military career was likely finished. She had refused to be broken by prejudice and had defended her dignity when it was attacked. Whatever consequences followed, she could face them knowing that she had stood up for every woman who had ever been told they didn't belong, every person who had ever been dismissed because of who they were rather than what they had accomplished. The confrontation that would change everything had reached its climax, but the real consequences were only beginning to unfold. The immediate aftermath of the confrontation felt surreal to everyone present. Admiral Harrison stood unsteadily, supported by his guards, his usually perfect uniform wrinkled and his carefully maintained composure completely shattered. Elena remained at attention, her face bearing the red mark of his slap while her eyes stayed fixed straight ahead, refusing to show any sign of regret for her actions. Commander Martinez quickly took control of the situation, understanding that every decision made in the next few minutes would have far-reaching consequences. He had witnessed the entire exchange and knew that Elena had acted in self-defense, but he also understood the political ramifications of a junior officer physically taking down an admiral, regardless of the circumstances. "Admiral Harrison," Martinez said carefully, "I think it would be best if we move this discussion to a more private setting. Captain Vasquez, you'll need to come with us as well." Elena nodded slightly, maintaining her military bearing despite the chaos swirling around her. She could see the cadets watching her with a mixture of awe and concern, and she tried to project calm confidence even though her mind was racing with thoughts of court-martial proceedings and the end of her military career. As they moved toward the administrative building, Admiral Harrison's aide hurried alongside his superior, whispering urgently about damage control and proper procedures. Elena caught fragments of their conversation, mentions of incident reports, potential media attention, and the need to handle this quietly to avoid scandal. The group filed into Commander Martinez's office, where the tension was so thick it seemed to fill the room like fog. Admiral Harrison slumped into a chair, still breathing heavily from the combination of physical impact and wounded pride. His guards positioned themselves near the door, unsure whether they were protecting him from further attack or preventing Elena from leaving. Elena stood at attention in the center of the room, her hands clasped behind her back in perfect military posture. Despite the gravity of her situation, she felt an odd sense of peace. For years, she had bent over backward to accommodate the prejudices of men like Admiral Harrison, always trying to prove she deserved to be treated with basic respect. The confrontation had stripped away all pretense and forced everyone present to confront the reality of institutionalized discrimination. "Captain Vasquez," Admiral Harrison wheezed, his voice still rough from the blow to his solar plexus, "you are under arrest for assaulting a superior officer. Guards, place her in restraints." Commander Martinez held up a hand to stop the guards from moving. Admiral, I think we need to discuss exactly what happened here before we take any formal action. There were numerous witnesses to the entire incident. Admiral Harrison's face darkened further at Martinez's intervention. Are you questioning my authority, Commander? I am ordering the arrest of this officer for striking an admiral of the United States Navy. Sir, Martinez replied carefully, I'm not questioning your authority, but I am concerned about following proper procedures. The incident occurred in front of multiple witnesses, and there are protocols we need to follow to ensure any subsequent proceedings are handled correctly. Elena watched this exchange with growing understanding of the impossible position her colleagues were being placed in. They wanted to support her, but challenging Admiral Harrison directly could destroy their own careers. The military hierarchy that had protected her during her rise through the ranks was now working against her. Lieutenant Colonel Thompson entered the office, his expression grim. Elena could see that he had been making phone calls and gathering information in a short time since the confrontation. His presence seemed to add another layer of tension to the already charged atmosphere. Admiral, Thompson said formally, I've been in contact with the Judge Advocate General's office regarding proper procedures for this incident. They've advised that all parties should refrain from making statements until a formal investigation can be conducted. Admiral Harrison struggled to his feet, his face contorting with renewed anger. I don't need advice from lawyers about how to handle insubordination. This woman attacked me in front of dozens of witnesses. Actually, sir, Thompson replied steadily. The witnesses I've spoken with describe you striking Captain Vasquez first, followed by her defensive response. Under military law, personnel have the right to defend themselves against assault, regardless of the relative ranks involved. The room fell silent as the implications of Thompson's words sank in. Elena felt a flicker of hope, though she tried not to let it show on her face. Are you suggesting that this insubordinate woman had the right to attack me? I'm suggesting that if you struck her first, as multiple witnesses have confirmed, then she had the legal right to defend herself, Thompson replied firmly. The fact that you're an admiral doesn't give you the authority to physically assault subordinates. Elena could see Admiral Harrison's worldview crumbling in real time. He had operated for so long under the assumption that his rank gave him unlimited authority over those beneath him that the concept of legal limitations on his behavior seemed incomprehensible. Commander Martinez seized the opportunity to try to defuse the situation. Perhaps we should all take some time to cool down before making any irreversible decisions. Admiral, your aide mentioned that you have other appointments today. Maybe it would be best to postpone any formal actions until everyone has had time to review the situation calmly. But Admiral Harrison was beyond rational consideration. The humiliation of being physically defeated by a woman he despised had triggered something primal in his psychology. His entire sense of identity was built around dominance and control, and Elena's successful defense had shattered that foundation. I want this woman court-martialed immediately, he demanded, pointing an accusatory finger at Elena. She's a disgrace to the uniform and a threat to military discipline. If we allow junior officers to attack their superiors without consequences, we'll have complete breakdown of order. Elena finally spoke, her voice calm, but carrying a steel edge that commanded attention. Admiral Harrison, you struck me first in an unprovoked assault. I defended myself using minimal necessary force, and immediately ceased aggressive action when the threat was neutralized. My conduct was entirely within military regulations governing self-defense. Admiral Harrison's mouth opened and closed soundlessly as he processed Elena's words. She had not only defended herself physically, but was now defending herself legally with the same competence and precision that had made her an outstanding officer. You can't, he stammered, clearly struggling to form a coherent response. Sir, Elena continued, if you wish to pursue formal charges against me, I welcome the opportunity to present my case before a military tribunal. I'm confident that an objective review of the evidence will support my actions. Thompson and Martinez exchanged glances, both recognizing that Elena was calling Admiral Harrison's bluff. A formal court-martial would require a thorough investigation of the incident, including testimony from all witnesses and a review of Admiral Harrison's own conduct. Given his obvious prejudice and inappropriate behavior, such an investigation might end up damaging his reputation more than Elena's. Admiral Harrison seemed to realize the same thing. His aide whispered something in his ear that made his face grow even paler. Elena suspected the aide was explaining the potential media attention and scrutiny that would accompany a high-profile court-martial involving charges of discrimination and assault. The tension in the room shifted as Admiral Harrison found himself in an increasingly untenable position. He had expected Elena to collapse under pressure, to beg for mercy or accept punishment quietly. Instead, she was forcing him to confront the legal and professional consequences of his own actions. "This isn't over," Admiral Harrison said finally, his voice filled with frustrated rage. "I'll find a way to remove you from service, one way or another." Elena met his gaze steadily. "Sir, if you believe I'm unfit for service, then you should pursue official channels to address your concerns. I'll face any legitimate review of my performance with confidence." Commander Martinez stepped forward, sensing an opportunity to end the standoff before it escalated further. "Admiral, perhaps it would be best if we concluded today's inspection. Everyone needs time to process what's happened here." Admiral Harrison looked around the room, seeing the faces of officers who had witnessed his unprofessional conduct and Elena's measured response. He could read the subtle shift in their attitudes. They were no longer looking at him with automatic deference, but with the wariness people showed towards someone whose judgment had been called into question. "Fine," he said through gritted teeth. "But this matter is far from resolved." As Admiral Harrison and his entourage prepared to leave, Elena remained standing at attention. She understood that while she had won this particular battle, the war for her career was far from over. Admiral Harrison would undoubtedly use his influence to make her life difficult, and she would need to be prepared for ongoing challenges. Thompson approached Elena as the others filed out. "Captain, you should know that several cadets and instructors have already volunteered to provide statements supporting your version of events. What happened today, it took tremendous courage." Elena nodded gratefully, though she kept her expression professional. "Thank you, sir. I simply did what any officer should do when faced with an assault." "Perhaps," Thompson replied, "but not every officer would have had the strength to stand up to that kind of pressure. You've earned a lot of respect today." As the office emptied, Elena finally allowed herself to process the full weight of what had occurred. She had survived a direct confrontation with one of the Navy's most powerful figures, and she had done so without compromising her principles or dignity. The road ahead would undoubtedly be difficult, but she had proven to herself and others that she would not be intimidated or broken by prejudice. The incident would become a turning point not just for Elena's career, but for the broader struggle for equality within the military. Word of her courageous stand would spread throughout the naval community, inspiring other women and marginalized officers while putting those who abuse their power on notice that their behavior would no longer be tolerated without consequences. The confrontation was over, but its reverberations would be felt for years to come. 3 weeks after the confrontation, Elena sat in her office reviewing the mountain of paperwork that had accumulated during the investigation. The official inquiry into the incident had been thorough and exhausting, involving interviews with dozens of witnesses, reviews of security footage, and psychological evaluations of all parties involved. The investigation had vindicated Elena completely. Multiple witnesses confirmed that Admiral Harrison had struck her first, and military psychologists had documented a pattern of discriminatory behavior in his treatment of female officers. The final report recommended no action against Elena, while suggesting that Admiral Harrison undergo sensitivity training and anger management counseling. But Elena knew that official vindication was only part of the story. The incident had created ripple effects throughout the naval hierarchy, dividing officers into camps that either supported her actions or viewed them as a dangerous precedent that undermined military discipline. Her future in the service remained uncertain despite her legal victory. A knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, looking up to see Commander Martinez entering with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Captain," he said formally, "I have some news that I think you'll want to hear." Elena braced herself, unsure whether to expect good news or bad. The past few weeks had brought both support from unexpected quarters and hostility from officers she had considered allies. The emotional roller coaster had been almost harder to endure than the original confrontation. Admiral Harrison submitted his resignation yesterday, Martinez announced. Effective immediately. Elena stared at him in shock. She had expected the Admiral to fight the investigation's findings, perhaps seeking reassignment or using his political connections to minimize the consequences of his actions. The idea that he would voluntarily end his career had never occurred to her. "His resignation?" she repeated, needing confirmation of what she had heard. Apparently, several other female officers came forward after news of your incident became public, Martinez explained. They provided detailed accounts of similar harassment and discrimination they had experienced under his command. The Navy's Inspector General decided that a broader investigation was warranted, and Admiral Harrison chose to resign rather than face that level of scrutiny. Elena felt a complex mixture of emotions at this news. Relief that her primary antagonist was gone, but also sadness that it had taken a public confrontation to bring attention to problems that had been festering for years. How many talented women had left the service or been denied opportunities because of Admiral Harrison's prejudice? "There's more," Martinez continued, taking a seat across from her desk. "Your handling of this situation has attracted attention from some very senior people. Admiral Chun, the Chief of Naval Operations, wants to meet with you personally." Elena's stomach fluttered with nervous anticipation. Admiral Chun was one of the most respected leaders in the Navy, known for his progressive views on military reform and his commitment to merit-based advancement. A personal meeting with him could signal either great opportunity or serious concern about her future. "When?" Elena asked, maintaining her professional composure despite the magnitude of this development. "Next week at the Pentagon. She wants to discuss your career path and some potential new opportunities that have emerged as a result of recent events." Elena nodded, her mind already racing with possibilities. The meeting could lead to a prestigious assignment, or it could be a polite way of ushering her out of service to avoid further controversy. In her experience, senior officials rarely called personal meetings to discuss routine career matters. Over the following days, Elena prepared meticulously for her meeting with Admiral Chun. She reviewed her entire service record, studied recent naval policies regarding workplace equality, and practiced responses to difficult questions about her actions and motivations. She was determined to present herself as a professional officer focused on service rather than as someone seeking to make political statements. The Pentagon was even more imposing than Elena had imagined. The massive building seemed to embody the weight of American military power, and she felt a renewed sense of pride in being part of such an important institution. Despite the challenges she had faced, she remained committed to serving her country with honor. Admiral Chin's office was surprisingly modest for someone of her rank and influence. The walls displayed commendations and photographs from her distinguished career, including images from her time commanding vessels in active combat zones. Elena could see why Admiral Chun had earned such respect throughout the naval community. "Captain Vasquez," Admiral Chun said as Elena entered, gesturing for her to take a seat. "Thank you for making the trip. I've been eager to meet you since receiving the investigation report." Elena studied Admiral Chin's expression, trying to gauge her mood and intentions. The Admiral appeared genuinely interested rather than hostile, which Elena took as a positive sign. "Thank you for taking the time to see me, Admiral," Elena replied professionally. "I'm honored by your attention to this matter." Admiral Chin leaned back in her chair, regarding Elena with obvious curiosity. "Captain, I've read every detail of what happened at the academy. I've also reviewed your entire service record and spoken with officers who have worked with you throughout your career. I have to say, your combination of professional competence and moral courage is exactly what the Navy needs more of. Elena felt a wave of relief at Admiral Chen's words, though she remained cautious about reading too much into the preliminary statements. I've simply tried to serve to the best of my abilities, Admiral, Elena responded. The incident with Admiral Harrison was unfortunate, but I believe I acted appropriately given the circumstances. Admiral Chen nodded approvingly. More than appropriately, Captain. You stood up to abuse of power while maintaining your professionalism and dignity. The fact that you were willing to defend yourself physically when attacked shows exactly the kind of backbone we need in our officer corps. Elena felt her hopes rising as Admiral Chen's support became clear. But she remained focused on understanding what this meeting would mean for her future. Admiral, may I ask about the purpose of this meeting? I want to ensure I'm prepared for whatever decisions need to be made about my career. Admiral Chen smiled slightly, and Elena could see a hint of admiration in her expression. Captain, the Navy is changing. We're finally recognizing that diversity and inclusion aren't just politically correct concepts, they're military necessities. We need the best people in leadership positions regardless of their background, and we can't afford to lose talent because of outdated prejudices. Elena listened carefully, sensing that Admiral Chen was building towards something significant. I'm offering you a position on my personal staff, Admiral Chen continued. You'd be working directly with me on policy development related to military personnel issues, with a particular focus on creating more inclusive environments that allow all service members to reach their full potential. Elena felt her heart race at the unexpected opportunity. Working with the Chief of Naval Operations would be the pinnacle of her career, but she also understood the symbolic importance of the assignment. She would essentially become a public face for military reform efforts. Admiral, I'm deeply honored by this offer, Elena said carefully. May I ask about the specific responsibilities this position would involve? Admiral Chen leaned forward, her expression growing more intense. Captain, what happened to you has happened to countless other officers throughout our history. Talented people have been driven out or held back because of discrimination and abuse of power. I want you to help me ensure it never happens again. Elena could see the passion in Admiral Chen's eyes and understood that this was about much more than her individual career. This was an opportunity to create systemic change that could benefit future generations of service members. You'd be helping to develop new training programs, review policies and procedures, and work directly with other branches of the military to share best practices, Admiral Chen explained. It would be challenging work, and you'd face resistance from people who prefer the status quo. Are you prepared for that kind of fight? Elena thought about all the obstacles she had overcome to reach this point in her career. The discrimination, the doubt, the moments when she had questioned whether the struggle was worth it. Then she thought about the young female cadets she had taught and mentored, and the difference this opportunity could make for others like them. Admiral, Elena said with growing conviction, I've been fighting that fight my entire career. The difference now would be having the authority and resources to make real change instead of just surviving the system as it exists. Admiral Chen's smile broadened at Elena's response. Excellent. There's one more thing you should know about this position. It comes with a promotion to colonel, effective immediately. Your heroism and leadership have more than earned the advancement. Elena felt tears threatening to form in her eyes as the full magnitude of what was being offered sank in. Not only was she being given a chance to make a meaningful difference, but she was also receiving recognition for her service that went far beyond what she had dared to hope for. Thank you, Admiral, Elena managed, her voice slightly thick with emotion. I accept the position and the promotion with gratitude and determination to exceed your expectations. As Elena left the Pentagon that afternoon, she reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this moment. The The confrontation with Admiral Harrison had been the most difficult experience of her military career, but it had also become the catalyst for opportunities she never could have imagined. 6 months later, Elena sat in her new office overlooking the Potomac River, reviewing proposals for updated harassment prevention training. The reforms she had helped develop were being implemented across all branches of the military, and early reports showed significant improvements in workplace culture and retention rates among female service members. The incident at the academy had become a case study used in leadership courses, demonstrating the importance of moral courage and the right of all service members to be treated with dignity and respect. Elena had testified before congressional committees about military culture and had spoken at ceremonies honoring women in service. Most importantly, she had received dozens of letters from young women who had been inspired by her story to pursue military careers or to stand up against discrimination in their own lives. These personal testimonials meant more to her than any official recognition or career advancement. Elena's phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was Commander Martinez calling from the academy. "Colonel Vasquez," he said warmly, "I have some news I thought you'd want to hear. We just graduated our largest class of female cadets in academy history. Many of them specifically mentioned your example as inspiration for their decision to serve." Elena smiled as she looked out at the setting sun over the Capitol. Her confrontation with Admiral Harrison had lasted only minutes, but its effects would continue rippling through the military community for years to come. She had stood up for herself and inadvertently stood up for everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. The girl who had once listened to her fisherman father's stories about naval heroes had grown up to become one herself, not through conquest or glory in battle, but through the quiet courage of refusing to accept injustice. Her legacy would live on in every woman who followed in her footsteps, secure in the knowledge that dignity and competence would ultimately triumph over prejudice and abuse of power. The admiral who had struck her in anger was gone, but Elena remained stronger than ever and dedicated to ensuring that future generations of service members would never have to endure what she had experienced. In the end, that victory was worth more than any medal or commendation. It was a triumph of principle over power, of justice over privilege, and of hope over fear.